In the heart of the Arizona desert, where the heat seems to stop time and the wind carries forgotten stories between the rocks, there stands an unassuming building with frosted windows and silent bars. St. Mary's Military Hospital, a place where heroism dissolves into routine and where glory retires alongside youth. There, in stifling hallways with yellowed walls and the scent of aged ether, walks a woman no one knows, yet everyone watches. Elisa Moran. Head nurse, steady steps, quiet voice. Her name doesn't make headlines. She's never been invited for interviews. But every day, she fights an invisible war. The war of keeping alive those the country has already forgotten. Elisa doesn't wear makeup. She wears scars inherited from a grief without a body. Her father, an army captain, disappeared on a mission in Afghanistan when she was still a teenager. Since then, she's learned not to expect answers, only to care for those who came back. At St. Mary's, she isn't known for fiery speeches or dramatic gestures. She's known for the silence with which she holds trembling hands, the patience with which she listens to repeated stories, and the way she folds sheets with the precision of a flag being lowered at sunset. Amid the muffled echoes of ventilators and the metallic clinking of equipment, Elisa walks the halls like someone carrying memories. Here, no one applauds when a patient improves. There are no flowers, no visitors. But she stays. Not because she expects gratitude, but because she believes someone must remember those who bled without applause. She doesn't seek justice. She seeks dignity. And perhaps that's why, when the most improbable story knocked on the hospital's doors, it wasn't the world that changed Elisa. It was Elisa who changed the world, without raising her voice. The sun hadn't yet fully broken through the sky when the usual silence of St. Mary's Hospital was torn by an unfamiliar sound. The deep rumble of military engines echoing through the streets of Phoenix. A convoy moved through the city with the urgency of a wartime operation. Inside the hospital, radios crackled with orders, hurried footsteps filled the halls, and Elisa Moran's face remained exactly the same. Calm, as if she'd seen it all before, even though she'd never seen anything like it. On the chart, the name was almost surreal: Donald J. Trump, former president of the United States. Admitted after a heart attack during a political rally in New Mexico. Rushed to St. Mary's not by accident, but by strategy. Discretion, security, and above all, distance from the traditional press. The hospital, isolated by nature and protected by military protocols, was the perfect refuge. Elisa was summoned to the director's office with few words. She would be directly responsible for the patient. No further explanation. Everyone knew that behind the scenes of power, when a former president falls ill, medicine becomes politics, and care becomes spectacle. But Elisa asked no questions. She just adjusted her badge and went back to work. Trump's presence caused visible tension. Doctors, nurses, and military personnel walked on eggshells. Some because of the weight of his name, others because of the controversy. There were whispered criticisms, covert selfies, even staff who left their shifts to avoid involvement. Elisa didn't react. When she entered his room, with the heart monitor beeping steadily, she looked at him as she would any other patient, as a vulnerable body, not a symbol. Honestly, it was unsettling, because there's something deeply revolutionary about treating a man like Trump with honest indifference. Not as an insult, but as principle. Elisa wasn't intimidated. She didn't bow. She didn't smile more than necessary. She acted as she always had, with firmness, silence, and responsibility. And maybe that's why her presence began to make more noise than the helicopters circling the building. In a world that bows to fame, Elisa's refusal to do the same was, paradoxically, the most powerful gesture anyone could offer. The following days passed slowly, like droplets sliding down a dusty window. The Arizona sun burned outside, but inside St. Mary's, the atmosphere was different. Heavy, guarded, suspended between glances and protocols. Donald Trump, accustomed to dictating the rhythm of every room he entered, was now just a patient monitored by wires, tubes, and silence. Elisa Moran kept to her routine with metronomic precision. She checked vitals, adjusted medication, changed sheets, recorded every detail in the chart with steady handwriting. No exaggerations, no distractions. At first, Trump showed the irritation of a man who'd lost control. He complained about the food, the light, the boredom. He tried to make conversation, crack jokes, gauge reactions. But Elisa, unlike the many who surrounded him in his public life, didn't smile out of obligation. She didn't feign kindness or try to please. She answered only what was necessary, in a low voice and with attentive eyes. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't being watched as a leader, but as a man. One afternoon, between an oxygen check and a change of hospital gown, Trump broke the silence. "Why do you still work here?" he asked, staring at the ceiling. There was something genuine in the question, almost as if he were asking himself. Elisa, folding a sheet with military precision, paused for a second. She didn't look at him. She just smiled, that restrained smile, not offered but revealed. And she kept folding, as if the answer were there, in the invisible crease of the fabric, in the daily repetition of a gesture no one applauds. That moment, as simple as it seemed, was the start of a crack. Not in the hospital, but in the man in the bed. And though he tried to hide it, that absence of reverence began to turn into curiosity. Because for someone like Trump, used to being the center of every room, Elisa's silence spoke louder than any headline. The night fell thick over the Arizona desert, like a warm, heavy cloak that muffled even the crickets. Inside St. Mary's, the silence was almost sacred. The dim hallway lights cast pale shadows on the walls, and the heart monitors pulsed in cadence, like a song only the living could hear. It was Elisa's last round. Past 3 a.m. when she entered Trump's room with the same quiet step as always, without fanfare. He was asleep, but not peacefully. His eyelids twitched, his fingers moved in small spasms. It wasn't the sleep of a man at peace, but of someone carrying weights he wouldn't admit aloud. She approached silently, checked the monitors, adjusted the 4, straightened the sheet with near-ceremonial care. Then she stopped. For a few seconds, she stood there beside the bed, observing not the former president, but the human being. Taking a deep breath, unscripted, she placed her hand firmly on his shoulder. His skin was warm, alive. He opened his eyes, half awake, confused. And then she whispered in a voice that seemed to have traveled decades. "Because there are people who bled for this country, and no one remembers them anymore." There was no reply. Trump just looked at her. But his gaze, once hardened, now seemed to hesitate. As if those words, so simple, so devoid of political intent, had slipped through a crack in his armor. There was no judgment, no speech. Just truth. A truth Elisa carried in her body and soul, day after day, as she cared for the forgotten without asking for anything in return. She removed her hand and left the room without another word. She expected no gratitude, no change. In truth, she expected nothing. To her, the gesture was just part of the routine, like folding sheets or administering medication. But that night, the hospital was quieter than usual, as if the walls had listened. And maybe, just maybe, the man who once commanded the entire world had listened too. Not with his ears, but with what little conscience he had left. The next morning, the hospital woke to unusual activity. Presidential security technicians were everywhere, adjusting wires, positioning microphones, testing lights. In the main lobby, which hadn't seen journalists in years, a small press conference was hastily arranged. Doctors whispered. Nurses peeked discreetly. Elisa, however, kept to her shift as usual, organizing charts, delivering breakfast trays, as if the world weren't about to change right there, under that worn-out roof. At exactly 9 a.m., Donald Trump appeared before the cameras. He wore a simple white shirt, still unbuttoned at the collar. No makeup, no teleprompter, no usual performative tone. Just a visibly tired but composed man. There was a brief silence before he spoke. Then, in a voice quieter than usual, he said, "Last night, someone reminded me that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a white coat and speaks softly." The words landed like a silent bomb. The journalists hesitated. Some swallowed hard, others prepared questions, but Trump raised his hand to continue. He didn't name names. He didn't explain the context. But he looked straight into the camera and finished. She didn't ask for anything. She just did what was right. And for the first time in a long time, I listened. The words weren't spoken with the usual eloquence of his speeches. There were no attacks, no boasts. Just a rare acknowledgement, and because of that, it was striking. What shocked people wasn't what he said, but how he said it, with no effort to control the narrative. Just a former president speaking like a patient who, for a moment, was merely human. In the hospital cafeteria, some staff stopped to watch. A nurse cried. A wheelchair-bound veteran murmured, "Finally." Elisa wasn't there. When they asked about her, they were told she had requested temporary leave that morning. She left no explanation. She simply vanished from the hospital the same way she had always moved through it, silently. But her absence spoke louder than any headline. Because when a man like Donald Trump acknowledges the worth of someone like Elisa Moran, something deep shifts, not just in him, but in the entire country. Elisa's absence didn't go unnoticed. The same day Trump made his statement, rumors began. Who was this nurse? Why had she left? Curiosity quickly turned into frenzy. Reporters swarmed the hospital, dug through records, spoke to colleagues. Within hours, the name Elisa Moran was everywhere online. But what truly ignited public opinion was the silence she left behind. Veterans began speaking up on social media. Men and women forgotten by headlines, by administrations, by campaign promises. Short videos and simple testimonies emerged. A former Marine shared that Elisa had been the only one to visit him during his last hospitalization. An Air Force veteran recalled how the nurse would sing to patients who never had visitors. Stories multiplied, none rehearsed, none political. Just real echoes of a presence no one had noticed until then. The hashtag echo of Elisa began as a whisper, but soon took over social media. Thousands used it to share stories of neglect, abandonment, and quiet gratitude. Volunteer groups formed spontaneously in cities across the country to visit military hospitals. News channels dedicated segments to the plight of forgotten veterans. Lawmakers, pressured by public outcry, began proposing emergency measures for veterans' care. But perhaps the most symbolic moment came when a young senator from Iowa, visibly moved, held up a photo of his mother, also a military nurse, on the Senate floor and said, "Today, Congress heard something it had ignored for too long. The whisper of those who hold this country together in silence." Elisa Moran was no longer in the halls of St. Mary's. She gave no interviews, accepted no honors. But unwittingly, she had sparked a movement. An entire country was waking up, not with shouts, but with remembrance. And for the first time in a long time, the invisible were at the center of the national conversation. All because of a phrase spoken in the dark. All because someone had the courage to remember. On the side of a community center in Tucson, where there had once been only time-stained concrete, a mural began to take shape. It was simple, almost timid. The faces of veterans sketched in bold strokes, their gazes forward. In the lower right corner, the silhouette of a woman, her back turned, a white coat slightly billowing, painted with the inscription, Elisa Moran. No visible face. No heroic pose. Just presence. The image spread as a symbol. It became a postcard, a t-shirt, a banner. Not for its aesthetics, but for what it represented. A country tired of shouting and division saw in that anonymous figure a truth hard to ignore. There is heroism that doesn't climb podiums, doesn't seek applause, doesn't demand space. It just acts. While lawmakers debated reforms and NGOs expanded support networks, the question hanging in the air was simple yet immense. Where is Elisa? Some claimed to have seen her boarding a bus to El Paso. Others swore she had returned to a rural clinic in New Mexico. But no one could confirm. And maybe that was for the best. Because the power of the story wasn't in her presence, but in the trail she left, like perfume after a dance or an echo after a gunshot. She didn't want medals. She didn't want status. She just wanted someone to listen. And when someone did, the entire country woke up. In the final scene, the Tucson mural fills the screen. The Arizona sun lights the fresh paint. Children play in front of it, running without fully grasping the weight of that image. A veteran approaches slowly, places his hand on the painted coat, and stands there in silence. The narrator's voice returns, steady and soft. She didn't want medals. She just wanted someone to listen. And when someone did, the whole country woke up. The image freezes on the mural, the wind kicks up desert dust, and a final caption appears. One nurse. One whisper. One nation awakened. The soundtrack fades into something gentle, almost ethereal, as if Arizona itself were holding its breath for a second. Then the screen darkens. The narrator's voice returns, closer now, almost like a friend speaking to you from the other side. If this story moved you, even for just a moment, then Elisa got what she wanted, to be heard. Not for fame, but because some truths only ordinary people have the courage to carry. Brief flashes of real people, veterans, doctors, children, grandchildren, saying thank you, as if answering the echo Elisa left behind. Finally, the channel's closing message appears, direct yet heartfelt. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, help us spread this one. Like, share, and subscribe. Your support gives voice to the forgotten and turns whispers into movement. The screen fades gently, but the silence left behind says it all.